for Development. Our first 30 years, that's what I've been asked to talk about. So I'm supposed to be talking about the first 30 years, but actually I'm going to go a little further back in history to 40 years ago. I was very young then, but had left school, and I started work at the International Bee Research Association, IBRA. Those of us that work there refer to it as IBRA. And I started there, and Dr. Eva Crane was my boss, and we had to call her Dr. Crane. I didn't ever call her Eva, however many years you'd worked there. And she was my boss at IBRA. And she was like a human internet. It's a shame she kind of lived a bit before her time, because her intent was to gather every bit of data on bees and beekeeping and store it beautifully at IBRA. IBRA was a huge building full of library and filing cabinets and computer punch cards and things. Eva Crane was before her time, and she was very intent on getting hold of every scrap of information about bees and beekeeping around the world. And she published her books, and she was writing her books, and I was there. And she had an army of similar kind of blue stocking ladies working for her. And I was very much the youngest one. And I think she liked me because I knew how to use a word processor, which was kind of new in those days. I was that young one that knew how to use that thing. So I started work there, and my job was to compile information about tropical beekeeping. And so it gave me a fabulous chance for 10 years to work in different parts of the world. And I started doing consultancies for organizations like United Nations and the World Bank, and that earned money for IBRA. But for me, it gave me a fabulous opportunity to learn about bees and beekeeping. And I'm incredibly grateful to Eva Crane that she gave me that opportunity. And it was a wonderful time. I learned a lot about bees and beekeeping. But unlike Dr. Crane, I was kind of interested in the social aspects of beekeeping, and I began to realize that actually beekeeping is the most fabulous tool for achieving social development. Amazingly good, actually. And after, I don't know why my whole life is split up into 10-year periods, but almost 10 years to the date, a kind of swarm happened, whereby I and Helen Jackson, who many of you know, and some others left, and we told the then council we're going to start Bees for Development. We're going to be focused on beekeeping for human development, and Bees for Development started the next day on the 1st of April 1993, which was 30 years ago. So that was how I got there. And a lot of the then IBRA Council, the Board of Directors, it was John Free, Roger Morse, Gordon Townsend, I don't know if any of you know these names, but these venerable gentlemen of the bee world, they were kind of supportive, and we were allowed to bring with us many of the things that had started at IBRA, including what is now Bees for Development Journal, which is still going today on its 144th edition. So although we are 30 years old, we're actually a bit older than that because we kind of started before 30 years ago. But on the 1st of April 1993, Bees for Development started work, and that's what I'm going to tell you about this morning. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about who we are, our approach, which of course has evolved over the years, what we really do, changes that we've made along the way, give you some tiny glimpses of what we're doing right now, and most importantly, encourage you to become involved with us. So where are we? We're in Monmouth. That's in Wales. It's a small town on the Welsh border, so my bees forage across the border into England every day. And recently Monmouth, our town, has been renamed Monmouth Bee Town. And so on the right, it's a kind of typical Monmouth scene, the Christmas Santa fun run, but there's Giacomo in his bee outfit. So it's a generally bee-flavoured town, I can say, with lots of good bee things going on. That is the King's Head, but that sort of greenish building to the left, that's our headquarters, that's where we're situated. So who are we now? We're 8 professional, full-time employed people working there, and we have in-country teams, which means people that we're paying to do the work of training and many other things. They're doing the work. It's not us really flying back and forward on aeroplanes. So it's local people doing the training in local beekeeping, and we're paying those people to do that work there. So this morning, they're out doing it as I speak. We know what they're doing, and they're working away full-time all the time. We also have more than 100 volunteers. I had to count them up for something last year, and we had about 140 volunteers doing different things. Not necessarily in Britain. We've got volunteers in all sorts of interesting corners around the world doing odd things for us, translating stuff. If we do something in London, there's a kind of lovely London group of people that help us with things, all sorts of volunteers. We have 8 trustees who, of course, are volunteers as well. They support us in many, many ways, but they never get any financial support in any way. They completely help us on their own. We have 6 patrons, and we have 1 president who recently got promoted. So this was on a chilly day last February. That's kind of some of us outside Bees Development. We have a small shop at the front of our offices which raises revenue for our work, one of many, many different ways that we gain funding. That was just a chilly day when there was quite a lot of us in the office, and some of our trustees there, some of whom you'll know. Bob Spencer's always at the Honey Show, and Paul Smith is the chair of the trustees who runs Thorns. And most importantly, my dog, Panda. But then we have teams in country as well, and I was doing this last night. I'm trying to grab pictures of them. I clearly need to make more effort with that. But these are our partners, and we're talking to them every day. It's so wonderful. It's a wonderful outcome of COVID, really, that it forced all our partners to really update and get on with wonderful, the things we're all using, Zoom and Teams and things, which has made a huge difference to our work and our communications. And as I say, increasingly, we don't have to go there anymore. We can achieve all the project management without going there. Then these are our trustees. As I say, you will know some of them. And we have lovely ambassadors as well. And we have 6 lovely patrons. I think many of you will know that Bill died and his funeral was last month, but I can't quite bear to take his picture out yet because somehow he's still working for us. Lots of people are donating in his memory, so I feel like he's still working hard on our behalf. In North America, Tom Seeley, we're delighted that he's also a patron. He endorses our work, which is very important for us, that we have his scientific backing and support for everything that we do, and he kind of loves what we do and appreciates it. And so there's a slightly separate North American organisation, which is a 501c3 registered not-for-profit organisation. So Tom Seeley and Megan Denver and Yorick Phillips are on the board of that organisation, because increasingly we have to look to North America for funding support. And here is our president. She, as I say, has recently been promoted, and we're delighted to have her endorsement. I think she kind of likes us because she is a beekeeper. You can have a beekeeping conversation with her because she does know about beekeeping, And I think we must be one of the smallest charities that she's involved with, so she kind of likes us that way. She's deep in conversation there with Kwame Edu, who runs Bees for Development Ghana, and behind her is Baroness Scotland, who's the head of the Commonwealth Secretariat. So every second year we borrow their garden to organise a London fundraiser. So that's who we are, just to give you some idea. Now I'm going to get on to the more crucial stuff. So when we began work in 1993, we had very clear aims. It was not about accumulating data on bees. It was about beekeeping for poverty alleviation. And it was also at the same time to increase biodiversity, because the fabulous thing about beekeeping is that when you train a beekeeper, you're at the same time, to some extent, training a botanist and somebody who is invested in their habitat, and the beekeeping incentivizes them to maintain that habitat. And that's why beekeeping is so good as a source of livelihood for rural people. And when we started in 1993, lots of people said, "Oh, Nicola, you can't use that word because biodiversity, nobody knows what biodiversity means." And I said, well, we have to use it because there isn't really another word that captures it. And time has gone along, and I think people do know what biodiversity is, sadly, because we're destroying it. And for some of the people at Bees for Development, I would say that bees, maintaining bees, all bees and their habitat is their focus. And in a way, we're kind of using the humans to achieve that. And for other people, the humans are the focus and the bees are the agency for poverty alleviation. Well, I don't mind what their focus is as long as we do it well and it's happening. And I am kind of preaching to the converted here this morning. So I'm not going to tell you the reasons why beekeeping is so good, because you all know that already. But it is uniquely marvellous in that the products that people have as financial incentive, honey and beeswax, of course, those are just the byproducts of pollination and maintaining their crop pollination and ecology of the area where they live. So it's kind of win-win. And as during our 30 years, it's just got more important to find rural livelihoods, especially for young people. During COVID, we saw that people who'd gone to urban centres like Bahida and Addis in Ethiopia, like Accra in Ghana, they'd gone to these urban centres before, but as soon as COVID came, tourism disappeared, all sorts of income opportunities disappeared. They all went home to their rural roots, to their families, had no means of income, usually no land to grow crops on, and increasingly turned to beekeeping. So we have been really struggling to keep up with demand to help these young ones get going in beekeeping. So our approach has not changed. Wherever there are flowering plants and bees, you will find beekeepers, and those beekeepers know best how to do beekeeping in that area. So on the left there is a beekeeper in Zambia with a beautiful bark hive, which takes about 20 minutes to make and costs nothing. So we're always interested in how beekeeping is done there already. We're not interested to change it. So we are only about using local bees, local skills, local materials, and locally made equipment. If you're working with people who are facing absolute destitution, they have to be able to make their own equipment. That gives them a sense of empowerment, and it means the beekeeping can carry on without need for anybody like us providing inputs. So in the 1980s and 1990s, I was working in Tanzania a lot, working on forestry projects. In those days, there was a lot more emphasis. There was a huge tropical forestry plan for restoring forests. I mean, we still seem to be doing just the same, but even more desperately now. And so our logo was a tree with a beautiful log hive hanging in it, and it's slightly evolved over the years, been redrawn a few times, but remains essentially our logo today, because we're not just about bees, we're about the beekeeping and the habitat and the people. But these things keep changing. We will, I guess, change it again quite soon. That period gave me a really good chance to learn a lot about beekeeping for poor people and what's best for them, and realizing that equipment that works well in UK or Europe or North America does not work well with tropical bees, which they may look kind of similar, but tropical honeybees, especially in Africa, they're the same species as here, but their biology and behavior and ecology is completely different from here. And frame hives are not the answer in the tropics because of the many reasons, actually. It's not just the different behavior of the bees, it's the different economy of the people as well. So local bees are always the best ones. They're freely available. Uniquely in agriculture, bees go and find their own food. They do find their own food. I know in Britain we kind of got used to feeding bees, but actually you don't need to feed them. They find their own food, and it may seem obvious, but if people have no land of their own, this is the only kind of agriculture they can do, because the bees have got their own transport and they can fly off and feed. And that makes bees so different from cows or hens or anything else. And it makes beekeeping super wonderfully sustainable. So what do we actually do? We do primarily two things. One is still about providing information to beekeepers in poor countries, because beekeeping is a funny subject that doesn't quite fit into any category. Bees are insects, but most departments of entomology are concerned with killing insects, but bees are beneficial. A lot of the countries where we work, beekeeping is in forestry, but it doesn't quite work in, it's not covered by forestry departments because they're concerned with timber. So quite often beekeeping gets missed out, and we endeavour to provide that free information for beekeepers in those countries where they just don't have any other beekeeping information. And then we also nowadays run our own community projects. And since I was at IBRA 40 years ago, and since then we've often worked for other agencies, been involved in other people's beekeeping programs, and quite often been dissatisfied by the confusion they were causing, or one way or another that they weren't sufficient. And in the end, we want to run our own projects and do them perfectly. And the organisations we work with, we call them centres of excellence, because then if there is another programme doing beekeeping, we want trainers from our centres of excellence to show them really how to do it. It's a sorry thing, but there's very many poor beekeeping projects underway in the developing world for various reasons. So we worked in more than 50 countries by now, in all sorts of different and difficult places like Chechnya and Afghanistan and El Salvador. And the reason is, another great benefit of beekeeping is that when a country's infrastructure is destroyed through maybe human war, or because of earthquakes and things, tsunamis, you can get going with beekeeping faster than you can restore other kinds of agriculture, because you kind of get a harvest from beekeeping next season when things flower again, but other kinds of agricultural infrastructure take much longer to recover. And a lot of the beekeeping and the beekeepers we work with, the hives look like this. So these are beautiful beehives hanging in the forests of southwest Ethiopia. It is an important source of livelihood in these forests. This is beautiful African forest, and it's absolutely full of beautiful African beekeeping. And we think this actually is fabulous resource use, because how else would you harvest the nectar and pollen that is in the flowers of that forest? The beekeepers in countries like this walk into the forest carrying the hives, and they completely fill that forest with hives. And this is in Ethiopia. It's very interesting that lots of young people are now doing this forest beekeeping. They want to do it. They realise then they can create cash from it. So it's not kind of an old person's activity. Young people are doing it. And we think it's fabulously good use of resources. They walk in with the hives, they distribute them throughout the forest. Even if you had roads and trucks, you couldn't do it as efficiently as they are doing, walking with the hives and placing them in the forest. So these beekeepers are really harvesting all that nectar and pollen to produce very good, very clean honey and beeswax. And how else would you do it? How else would you make that income? The only other way to make income from this forest really is extractive and involves cutting it down. And there's places in Ethiopia where you can look where there's very good forest management plans with beekeepers and the forest is retained, and then where there's no plans like that, no involvement of beekeepers, it's cleared. So we want to make the argument very strongly that beekeepers are guardians of forests, and we can point to places all around the world where it's really the beekeepers that are getting good, sustainable income from forests, and it's them that are protecting it. So as time has gone along, we like to talk about nature-based beekeeping, and it's very interesting to think why this beekeeping is so good. It's all about local bees living naturally. They have genetic integrity. These are healthy populations of honeybees. They're widely spaced. It's extensive, not intensive beekeeping. They swarm naturally. This is part of the colony's self-healing behaviour. They're not stressed by the beekeepers. All the bees really do is situate the hives and then harvest honey. When it's the season, there's no other interference or stress. The beekeepers are not fiddling about, not introducing stuff, not shifting them, not stressing them. So we would like to say really it's the natural selection and the genetic integrity of the honeybee population that maintains their fitness and health without any chemical treatments. Moving on, we publish lots of stuff like how to process beeswax. This stuff isn't available otherwise if we're not turning it out. So if somebody tells us that they've got a training course coming up in Western Gambia or something, we make them up a nice resource box full of training materials and post it to them. And we do a lot of this because although there's lots of internet cafes, there's not lots of internet printers. And when you're doing training, even here when you're doing training, it's hard to have a demonstration apiary and everything. Beekeepers really need training materials for good training, so we still produce lots of printed stuff and will continue to do so. So this is the journal, which is still going out. We're on edition number 144, and we've kind of had an experiment this time to do it jointly with Natural Bee Husbandry magazine. So it's a bit of an experiment by us to see if that works. But we send ours out free. It went out free yesterday to all of our mailing list in developing countries. And then there are things that happen, like Bill Gates has got a huge program against malaria in Africa, and they are distributing lots of free mosquito netting impregnated with permethrin. And of course, lovely free netting is very attractive to beekeepers as something to filter your beeswax through, but it ends up that the permethrin is in the beeswax, and then it's of no interest to those cosmetic companies that want to buy lovely clean beeswax. So who else is going to tell the beekeepers, don't use mosquito netting to filter your beeswax, than us, really? That's our job, to tell odd things like this that happen as time goes on. And we will still produce posters and training materials for a long time, because whatever you might think here or in the office, it's only when you go there you realise how short people really are of these materials. But then increasingly people do have smartphones, so we put a lot of love and effort into our resource centre, and we've got about 30,000 things on there now. I think this is the Eva Crane in me still trying to accumulate lots of information for beekeepers. So here's a typical beekeeper, Stephen in Uganda. We're all the time interviewing beekeepers and maintaining, we have to know that what we're doing is right for them. We're asking him, is beekeeping good business? Yes, I tried crop farming, but I'm not getting the yields. Probably he, just has a scrap of land somewhere. I started growing trees, but they take time to grow. Bees give short-term gain and the costs are low. The bees feed themselves. They also give security for his site. People don't cut the trees and they don't let the cattle browse, and he's earned money and he's paid school fees. And when I'm harvesting honey, people are ready to come and buy. I will continue. And we are talking to the people we work with all the time and finding out and understanding their constraints is very important. We have a very kind of firm approach to how beekeeping development should be done. We don't train people in like a week or two. We stay with every person for 2 years, because it takes, we say, 2 years to really become a beekeeper, to have gone through the seasons and to have traded that produce. And for many of these people we work with, they've got no experience at all of doing a bit of business. That's why they're so chronically poor. They've never done that before. So inevitably we get involved in other things like setting up village savings and loans groups, so that because you have all your honey at one time and then you sell it all at one time and you get your cash all at one time. So we help people to have savings groups so they don't just go and blow it straight away. We get involved in all sorts of other things than just the beekeeping. And in fact, we're not even doing the beekeeping training. It's local people that are doing that. But there's no point in training a beekeeper if they don't have a market to sell into. It's no good. It's not a hobby for these people. They won't do beekeeping unless they really get a product and they can really sell it into a market. So we spend a lot of effort on market chains and market access, and all these other things that you have to do to get beekeeping to work. There's no point training a beekeeper if there's nowhere for the bees to forage. And in many of the places where we work, the irony is that they're very poor because the habitat is so terrible. So increasingly, half of our work is on habitat restoration. And that's very difficult work, because it's no point planting trees, but then 2 years later, somebody comes and grazes it with their cattle. So you have to have community engagement and buy-in, and this is years and years and years of work, because that community has to buy into protecting that bit of land for the next 5 or 10 years. So it's work that goes on and on. You can't just go in and, do a quick fix beekeeping project. There's a lot more to it than that. So this really is written down, our approach. The beekeepers have to make their own hives at low cost or no cost. And the bees can obviously be placed anywhere. It's all about local expertise, using local skills and knowledge. And for the people we're working with, often formal training as such is not something they've done, and that doesn't really work. Beekeepers must not ever be dependent on any kind of handout. Their beekeeping has to be completely within their own control so that they can scale it up. Everything we do must be easily copied by other people. That's a very good attribute. And that means people can scale up if they feel that they want to do so. And of course, we want them to do so. With a good market, beekeeping will always thrive at the end of our support. So we put lots of effort onto the market. Our projects are very cost effective. We're not spending any money really on capital equipment. And we say we change the lives of more people than when you just have hive donations. But changing the people's lives is something that we have to monitor. It's not interesting for us that Bees Development Ghana trained 200 people this month. We have to know what difference did they make to those 200 people. So there's a lot of effort on, you have to do baseline surveys at the beginning of the work and keep monitoring it so that we know actually what's happening. So just to show you a little bit more, here's Tilahun, who runs Bees for Development in Ethiopia, which started 10 years ago. It's a completely autonomous organisation. We hope that in the fullness of time they'll just keep going without depending on us for support. They're in Bahadar, which is just south of Lake Tana in a biosphere reserve, but it's kind of horrible there. There's no trees. It's a horrible situation of human destitution, really very, very poor. And our projects always look like this. It always looks like people making their own hives. So there's a young girl making her own hive in Amhara. And then we know a lot about them. The average cash income here is the equivalent in Ethiopian birr of about $270 a year. So that's a lot less than $1 a day. And these people are absolutely destitute, and we identify them from the government. The government brings these families that are at the absolute bottom. So in this case, they make top bar hives, and a comb from a top bar hive like that sells for about the equivalent of $3. So if you go there, if you go to our resource centre, you can see a lot of the training that we do in how to make hives. There's videos now that people can see on their phones of how to make weaving hives like that. So it's always about that kind of beekeeping that they can do. Beautiful, actually. But it doesn't cost anything, that's the main point. So here is Shide. He's just one trainee that we followed very closely. He had no income source of his own, but he had 3 young children, 3 boys, and the 2 boys that were at school, because in Ethiopia there's universal education for the youngest children, but he was taking those 2 boys out of school to pick stones in fields, so waged labour. So we taught him beekeeping. There he is making a top bar hive, and with everybody in Ethiopia, we want them to increase their income by about 40%, and we monitor this very carefully. So there he is with his top bar hive and his children. And from his very first harvest, he earned the equivalent of $40. So his annual was 270, but he got 40 from his first harvest. So somebody like him, he knows how to do it now. He's completely empowered, and he has gone on that's now his main income source, is beekeeping. He's built a load more top bar hives completely on his own without us, because he knows it's something he can do. He's got the skills to do it, and nobody can ever take them away. This part of Ethiopia is in a horrible state right now. It's right next door to Tigray, so they have refugees coming from there. But we know people like him will be okay, because the bees are there and the beekeeping can be done. So this is a little video of a woman. We work with a lot of women. Her name's Netzanet. She had to leave her education to look after her mother, and this video is only 1 minute 59 seconds, if you can bear to watch one that long, but it just shows her life.
በጣም ስቀይት ነበር ከዚያ ቀደም እዚህ መግባት ይበጅ ማለት ነው። ትምህርት ቤት ያቋረጥኩበት ምክንያት እናቴ ጤና አጣች መጣሁ። በአጋማሽ ፈተና ላይ ጥዬው መጣሁኝ ቀረ። ዶክተር ለመሆን ነው ፍላጎቴ ነበር። እና ሳይሳካ ቀረና እንደዚህ ሆነ። አሁንም የተመሰገነ ይሁን። እናቴንም እያስታመምኩኝ ይህ ፕሮጀክት ይዘኝ በቃ ቤት እንኳን ሳር ቤት ነው የነበረችና አሁን እችን 25 ኪሎ በእነሱ ነው የሰራው። ንቦች ለልማት መጡ አደራጁና ካደራጁና አንዳንድ የቀፎ መግዣ ሰጡን። የኔውን መግዣ ማለት ነው የመንጋ መግዣ። አዛ ያን አንዷን ለሁለት እያደረግን ከአመት አሁን 7 ደርሰውልኛል። እና ከዛው ወደዚህ ነው ንቦች ለልማት ተደራጁን ወደዚህ ብር የመቆጠርና ብር ያየን የዛን ነው። ከዛ በፊት አላውቅም ነበር። እስከ 4000 እስከ 5000 የሸጥበት ወቅት አለ። አምና 3000 ነው የሸጥኩኝ። በሁለተኛው አመት ወዲያኛው አመት አንድ 5000 ብር ሸጥኩኝ። እዚህ ንቦች ባይኖሩ ምንም ትርጉም የለውም ነበር። እንደ ድሮ መነሳት መውደቅ እጅላፍ ብቻ ነው የነበረው። ዛፍ ላይ ሰቅልና ንቦች ይጠመዱበታል። የሴት ልጅ በጣም ጠቃሚ ነው። አንደኛ የሰው እጅ አታይም፣ ራሷን በራሷ ትስተዳደራለች፣ አትለምንም። ያው ልመና ወንድ ልጅ መለመን ልመና ማለት ነው አይደል? እሷ ግን አትለምንም። እንግዲህ ንቦችን እያሳደግኩኝ ከማር ወደ ሰም እያዘጋጁ ለመሸጥ እና ደግሞ ሌላ ለንቦች ሌላ ነገር ፈጥሬ ለመስራት ፈልጋለሁ።
So net's just one example. We've trained thousands of women like that by now, and typically making around somewhere between $100 and $200 from their beekeeping. That's what we want. That's about regreening the area that we have to do hand in hand with the beekeeping. We also work in Uganda. I just put this slide here because Dixon on the left, who runs it in Uganda, and Alice on the right, they've been to the honey show quite a few times. And now they run something in Uganda called National Honey Week, and it's very sweet because they all wear white coats, and it's very reminiscent of what's going on downstairs as we speak, but we kind of like it. This is an example from Uganda. We've been working for about more than 20 years there on the market chains to move on from this situation where the beekeepers are not incentivized to produce because there's no traders to come and buy in bulk. And you have to, if you work on a market chain, you have to get everything going at the same time. You have to have traders in place with access to credit because all the honey comes at the same time. And you have to get the supermarkets willing to buy the stuff. You have to work all along the market chain from the producer to the consumer. So we do a lot of that stuff. And we're very happy because nowadays there's lots of Ugandan honey in Kampala supermarkets and not just imported stuff. Zimbabwe, it's the same, more or less the same. Kind of I'm going back to my IBRA days because actually the truth is behind all of that we're so reliant on data collection. It's a big part of what we do. It's what our project managers are doing. We have our own MEL, which is very sweet because some of you know it's Welsh for honey, but actually it's monitoring, evaluating and learning. And that is our data system that is our kind of wonderful, well, it's an integral part of our work and how we keep hold of what we're doing and how the money's spent and what we're actually achieving on the ground. Then we use all these other things. Maybe this Kobo toolbox is the most wonderful thing because our trainers and project managers in the field, they've got Kobo toolbox on their smartphones. They don't have an internet connection, but they're collecting data every day on what they're doing, who they're training, what the honey's selling for. All this data goes into Kobo Toolbox, and then when they go back to town and they have an internet connection, we get it in Monmouth. So we're really kind of on top. Eva Crane would be quite proud of me, I think, on this data collection that is absolutely behind everything we're doing. And it's so good, really, how it all works. It's so clever. But behind the scenes, it's all very tedious stuff like this. You can't read it, but we're recording how many seedlings were planted, how much honey was harvested, how many trainings were done, how many beneficiaries. All this stuff is going on. And this is the super, super thing, this Kobo toolbox that puts the not very literate field staff into contact with us, and we can really keep a handle on everything. So behind it all we have Salesforce, so every day we can look how many projects are underway, how many beneficiaries are getting trained. All the data's collected nicely, and we're very careful about things now. We've discovered that even our partners were kind of ignoring people with disabilities. So we have very strict guidelines they have to follow so that we have always people with disability involved. They're not at the back of the queue, they're at the front of the queue, and they're in everything we do, and we can talk to our partners about if it's happening or not happening. We're also working in Ghana. I just wanted to show you a little bit of this. So long ago, when Lake Volta was dammed, 80,000 people lost their homes, and still today those 80,000 people are really poor. They're living in the outskirts, so this area was all flooded. But actually it's good habitat for beekeeping. The trouble is most of the habitat is just cut down to make charcoal. It's become the big charcoal producing bit of Ghana. And the people that live here, they go illegally into the park to hunt. They're horribly poor. They make charcoal, which is illegal, and they sell it, but it means the end of the forest. Lots of young men sitting about, nothing to do. They go honey hunting, which is not nice. They destroy more trees, more bees. So, of course, we're getting them beekeeping. Here they are with their beautiful beehives made of borassus palms, which are naturally hollow, very easy to make a beehive. And the thing is, these remote people can produce honey and beeswax that are fabulous quality because there's no industrial, no agrochemicals there. So, of course, it's this beautiful fixed comb beekeeping, and every hive is identified so that the honey and the beeswax are completely traceable. And we're kind of more interested in the beeswax because honey's a food and it's subject to all the kind of food criteria, whereas beeswax is a much easier product for them to deal with. So we need each beekeeper to be really producing volumes of beeswax because a trader won't come and buy it unless the trader can pick up a ton or two. So it's got to be big scale.
Bees for Development Ghana, the knowledge they imparted onto us, and here is the result. But it has really helped me and the rest of my friends. So a special thanks goes to Dr. Kwame Edu, Director General for Bees for Development Ghana. We really appreciate his knowledge he imparted on us. In fact, it has always kept us moving forward. So we thank him very much. God bless Dr. Edu. God bless Bees for Development. Bye.
Bye. I'm not sure you could quite hear what he was saying, but you can see we're talking about lovely volumes of beautiful, residue-free, perfect beeswax, completely traceable. So here's just a little infographic done by Giacomo, who's the project manager. So the beekeeper comes with the buckets. Here's the collection centre on Kobo Toolbox, getting all the data. And what is most wonderful now is that there's all these ways to send money by phone, so the remote beekeeper can get their money back in the village. And that's one of the things that's really helped us so much during the past 30 years. This mobile money has really made things work, because the beekeeper in the remote place can know very well what the proper price of honey is and isn't ripped off like they used to be. So it all works nicely. So we're just getting this nice system of traceability, because it's the traceability that really gives value to this produce. This is what it looks like in real life, lots of buckets, somebody on Kobo Toolbox, buckets with tight-fitting lids. Those are the most important bit of beekeeping equipment. And at the end of the day, cash exchanging. So how you can be involved. We're so lucky nowadays. We've got beekeepers all over the world supporting us, all sorts of groups, all doing funny things, but that kind of makes us resilient to have a large number of supporters, however large or small. Here is Bill Turnbull's lovely daughter-in-law, who's just run a marathon for us a fortnight ago. We've lots of runners raising money for us, all sorts of things. Then we increasingly cannot rely on the UK government. Our UK aid money was cut with 40 days notice the year before last, so we've forgotten we'll ever get money from there. We increasingly need support from companies, even Flow Hive support us, which is very nice. We have our shop in Monmouth. Few of you are likely to ever visit that lovely town, perhaps, but of course it's online as well, so have a look. That all helps to keep us going. I think that's it. Thank you so much for your interest.
I was interested hearing about the aims for your company, your organisation, and it reminded me a lot of UK agriculture as well, with the lack of livelihoods and rural livelihoods and opportunities for young people and ageing farmers, and with a lot of poverty and underproduction in farming, especially with millions of pounds loss of income with subsidy changes and marginal land as well. And I'd wondered if there was any organisation that's trying to use bees for the development of UK agriculture as well.
Good question. Come and talk to us. You're right. When you look at all the equipment downstairs, it makes you think beekeeping's not for poor people, but actually it still can be. And it's interesting because the WBC hive, the traditional British hive shaped like that, the reverend that invented it, he was inventing a hive that would be cheap and feasible for everybody to have a hive like that. The inside was made of old tea chests, and the outside was just for insulation. I mean, nowadays it's one of the most expensive hives you can buy, but it started off with a good intention of a hive for everybody. And the same with the People's Hive. The Varé hive was invented by Abbé Varé with the intention that every potager should have a beehive, because it's simple to make, 14-inch square box. So it would be nice somehow if beekeeping in Britain can go back a little bit to that concept of beekeeping, that's something available for everybody.
I came in a bit late, so I don't know if you mentioned this before, but I'd just like to say that my daughter and I went on one of your beekeeping courses in the Wye Valley, and it completely changed our view of beekeeping.
Hooray.
It was very instructive, and it was absolutely brilliant anyway. And if you haven't mentioned it, I would suggest anyone interested should go on one of your courses.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I can't see who you are, but that's a lovely endorsement. As the years went by, we inevitably have got, when we see the wonderful beekeeping that our beekeepers do, they don't talk about bee diseases all the time because it's not a thing for them. And when you start to think, why are these bees so healthy? Why are these honeybee populations so abundant? Then, of course, it leads to many other conversations. But running courses is another way that we raise income. We get scraps of income from so many different income streams. It's how we survive. And we do two things. One is we do our work, and the other thing we do is raise funds for our work. And actually they're both big jobs. So thank you.
You did a great job of explaining how they can change people's lives. The other aspect of using bees that we tend to forget is that honey and beeswax don't require any kind of special treatment. I mean, it's amazing when you go and try to talk to people about using agriculture, a goat or a cow or chicken or whatever. Bees is probably the only thing that there's no requirement for, it's heat stable, it's long, shelf life. So it's beautiful.
So I always think I'm over-egging it, but that's right. Honey doesn't go mouldy. How good is that? Everything else goes mouldy, but honey doesn't. And beeswax, you just shove it in a sack and it's packaged for export. It's just brilliant. It's so brilliant. And they can eat honey, of course, in the end. And the people we work with use it for medicine more than just a food.
Thank you, Nicola. As a big fan of Bees for Development, I just wanted you to unpick some of the extraordinary stories that you've told me over the years. And it's women's group of women who've been rejected from their families, and I just would love you to unpick some of those stories, because when you hear them, it really hits you.
When we started working in Amhara, I showed you on the map, we didn't actually know, but it's a horrible place, because one of the reasons is the average age of marriage for girls is 13 and a half years. That's the average. And what happens is these girls are sold for a dowry and they go to the new home, and often when they're 14, 15, they run back to their original home. And when they run back, they're not valuable anymore because they've already been sold once. They've had no education, they've missed their secondary education, they don't really have any skills, they're just another mouth to feed. So we found a lot of these young girls, actually, they're not even adults, and we've been training them in beekeeping, and they're very good at it, and they're very good at their value addition and marketing and so on. So that's one lot that we work with a real lot, and it's incredibly successful. It's wonderful. When I say it's a horrible area, it's not a horrible area. It's a beautiful area, but it's horrible from the point of view. It's like going to somewhere that's living in the Bible. People are all wrapped up in white, swaddling clothes. There's nothing. You don't see anything plastic. No one has plastic stuff because they're poorer than that. It's really destitute. It's about 40 years now since the whole Live Aid thing started, pretty much in that area. And those people are still poor like that, but they're not in the news. Somalia is only just coming in our news, but it's the most incredibly terrible crisis going on. But we've got so many other things to worry about nowadays that these things are not in the news as much as they used to be, and they should be.
If you're dealing with about 50 different nations, then you've got probably 50-ish different cultures. How do you sort of train your people to navigate around the various things?
All of our stuff has no copyright on it, so people can translate everything into their own language. But all of the training that we do, all the work we do, is always in local languages. It's not English stuff. Our trainers can speak English and read English, and they're doing English to us. But most of the people they're working with are not English. It's local languages. So yes, it's not us going and doing the training. It's always local trainers in the local language.